Captain Jessica Miller hunched over her workstation in the Pentagon's Special Operations Command Center, her coffee growing cold beside stacks of satellite imagery. The massive wall screen showed real-time feeds from military satellites, all focused on the unprecedented event unfolding over the Amazon rainforest. 17 obsidian ships, each larger than an aircraft carrier, descended through the atmosphere with impossible grace. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Roberts called from his station, "you need to see this spectrum analysis." Jessica pushed away from her desk, joints cracking from hours of tension. The subtle limp in her right leg, a souvenir from her last Green Beret mission, was more pronounced than usual. "What are we looking at?" "Their hull composition." Roberts shook his head in disbelief. "It's absorbing our radar, LiDAR, everything. If we weren't looking right at them, they'd be practically invisible to our instruments. Stealth tech that advanced, and they're landing in the middle of nowhere." Jessica frowned, studying the tactical overlay. The alien fleet had completely ignored major population centers, military installations, and strategic choke points. Instead, they were settling into a precise formation above the densest part of the Amazon rainforest. The main screen flickered, and Jessica's hand instinctively went to the M9 at her hip. A face appeared. At least, she thought it was a face. Iridescent scales covered features that were almost, but not quite, humanoid. When it spoke, its words were perfectly translated, carrying an aristocratic tone that made her jaw clench. "People of Earth," the alien commander's voice filled the room. "I am Supreme War Master Kavark of the Hegemony Defense Force. Your planet has been selected for integration into our empire. Resistance would be futile and unnecessary. We have chosen to establish our primary base of operations in one of your primitive wilderness zones to minimize civilian casualties." Jessica watched as the alien's expression shifted into what might have been a smile. "We are not barbarians. We will not destroy your cities or infrastructure. Our presence in this worthless jungle region will allow your civilization to continue functioning while we proceed with the integration process. Any military response would be—" He paused, mandibles clicking, inadvisable. The transmission cut off, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Jessica turned to General Hammond, who had been watching quietly from the back of the room. "Sir, they're making a mistake. A big one." Hammond raised an eyebrow. "Elaborate, Captain." "They're thinking like space fighters, not ground warriors." Jessica limped to the tactical display, expanding the terrain view of the aliens' chosen landing zone. "Look at their formation. Perfect geometric patterns, optimized for defensive fields of fire. In space. But they're setting down in the densest rainforest on Earth. They don't understand the terrain at all. And you do." The question wasn't challenging. Hammond knew her record. Jessica's hand unconsciously touched her leg. 3 years running counter-narcotics operations in that exact region. "Sir, 2 more training indigenous forces. That's not worthless jungle. It's the most complex fighting environment on the planet. And they just dropped their command center right into it." Hammond stepped closer to the display, his expression thoughtful. "They got technology we can't even understand, Captain. You think that matters?" "Permission to speak freely, sir. Always. They've never fought in an environment that fights back." Jessica zoomed in on the alien ships, now settling into clearings they'd burned into the canopy. "Look at how they're positioning. No adaptation to the terrain. No consideration for drainage during the rainy season. They're treating the jungle like it's just empty space with some obstacles." She allowed herself a grim smile. "Sir, I'd like to activate the Anaconda Protocol." Hammond's eyes widened slightly. "The contingency plan for unconventional warfare in the Amazon. That was designed for human opponents, Captain." "Yes, sir. But these aliens—" She gestured to their pristine ships, already gathering condensation in the humid air. "They don't respect the jungle. And that means they don't fear it. Yet." The general was quiet for a long moment, watching as more alien vessels descended through the clouds. Finally, he nodded. "Do it. Activate all sleeper cells. But Captain, sir, make them learn what that fear feels like. Jessica's smile turned predatory. Oh, they will, sir. They definitely will. Master Sergeant Jake Shadow Torres pressed his body against the thick trunk of a kapok tree, becoming one with its moss-covered bark. 80 feet below, a hegemony patrol moved through the underbrush, with all the subtlety of a wounded tapir. Their environment suits whirred and clicked, fighting the jungle's oppressive humidity. 5 aliens, each carrying what looked like plasma rifles, swept their sensors in wide arcs that illuminated the vegetation with pale blue light. Movement detected, one alien trooper announced, his translated voice crackling through external speakers. Quadrant 7, elevation 30 meters. Torres didn't move. He didn't need to. The howler monkey that had triggered their sensors screamed its morning call, and he watched the alien's helmet arrays swivel upward in perfect unison. 3 weeks of observation had taught him their weaknesses. Their sensors couldn't distinguish between biological movements and mechanical ones. To them, every swaying branch was a potential threat, every animal call a possible human signal. They were already going mad from it. His earpiece crackled softly. Shadow, this is Mantis. Package is wrapped. You've got 3 minutes. Copy, he subvocalized, the throat mic picking up the faintest whisper. Lieutenant Emma Blackwood's team had finished rigging their surprise. Now came his favorite part. Torres reached into his pocket and removed a small speaker, one of hundreds they'd scattered through the canopy. With practiced ease, he activated it and let it drop, the device's camouflaged surface vanishing among the leaves. 20 seconds later, a child's laughter echoed through the trees. The effect on the alien patrol was immediate. Their formation tightened, weapons raised. Another laugh, this time from a different direction. Torres allowed himself a small smile. The recordings were from his daughter's 7th birthday party, but in this context, they were psychological warfare at its finest. Sector clear, the patrol leader announced, but Torres could hear the uncertainty in the alien's voice. These primitive audio tricks won't. The leader never finished his sentence. From somewhere in the canopy, a massive branch crashed down, smashing through the jungle floor. The aliens scattered, their perfect formation dissolving into chaos. They didn't realize the branch fall had been carefully engineered, weakened over days. They couldn't know that their every patrol route had been predicted, mapped, and prepared for. Contact, one alien shouted, firing his plasma rifle at shadows. The superheated bolts turned leaves to ash, but hit nothing of substance. More laughter echoed through the trees, now coming from all directions. Torres keyed his mic once. The signal. Blackwood's team sprang their trap. The ground beneath the aliens' feet suddenly shifted, not enough to make them fall, but enough to activate their suit stabilizers. As they fought to maintain balance, their sensors went wild, trying to compensate for the movement. That's when Torres made his move. He dropped from the tree, his ghillie suit blending perfectly with the falling debris and scattered leaves. Before the aliens could reorient their sensors, he had disappeared into another section of canopy. Their helmet displays registered the movement but couldn't track it against the backdrop of the living jungle. Something's out there. The panic in the alien's voice was unmistakable now. Torres triggered the final phase. Every speaker in a half-mile radius activated at once, playing not laughter this time, but silence. The absolute, complete absence of the jungle's normal symphony of sounds. No birds, no insects, no wind in the leaves. The aliens froze. In the unnatural quiet, they could hear their own breathing, the whir of their suit systems, the pounding of their alien hearts. Then, just as their sensors registered movement from all directions, the jungle's noise returned in a deafening crescendo. Birds scattered from trees, monkeys howled, insects buzzed, a wall of sound that overwhelmed their audio processors. When it was over, the patrol stood alone in a small clearing, their sensors showing absolutely nothing unusual. But their equipment had been rearranged around them in a perfect circle, each piece disassembled and reconstructed in ways that made no functional sense. And on their patrol leader's faceplate, written in mud that their sensors registered as natural soil deposits, was a single word: welcome. Lieutenant Emma Mantis Blackwood crouched in her observation post, a natural hollow in a massive strangler fig, studying the holographic data stolen from a downed hegemony scout. The alien text floated in the humid air, casting a faint blue glow across her mud-streaked face. After 3 days of continuous decryption, her team had finally cracked the encryption on their neural interface protocols. "You seeing this, sir?" she whispered into her throat mic. Crystal clear, Captain Miller's voice crackled through her earpiece from the forward command post 50 kilometers away. "Their entire combat system is slave to those environmental suits." Emma watched another hegemony patrol through her scope, tracking their methodical movements. The aliens had adapted somewhat since their arrival, switching to tighter formations and increasing sensor sweep frequencies. But they still moved like spacecraft pilots forced to walk, all straight lines and calculated angles, completely ignorant of the jungle's natural flow. "They're fighting their suits," Emma realized, excitement creeping into her voice. "Look at their gait analysis. The neural interface is trying to impose space combat protocols on ground movement. It's actually fighting against their natural instincts." A sudden burst of plasma fire erupted from the patrol below, incinerating a patch of undergrowth. "False alarm, just another taper." Emma smiled as the aliens' sensor logs registered the spike in their vital signs. They were jumping at shadows, and their own technology was making it worse. "Mantis, are you thinking what I'm thinking?" Miller asked. "Already on it." Emma keyed a different channel. "Shadow, you got ears on?" "Always." Taurus' reply was barely a whisper. "Ready to test our theory." "Green light. Execute pattern Echo 3. Through her scope, Emma watched Taurus's team begin their approach. 5 operators, moving through the canopy with decades of combined experience, each one synchronized with the jungle's rhythm. When a branch swayed in the wind, they swayed with it. When animals fled their approach, they matched the tempo of the disturbance precisely. The effect on the hegemony patrol's sensors was devastating. "Multiple contacts," one alien shouted, his translated voice cracking with stress. "No, recalibrating. False readings." Their helmet displays flickered as the neural interface tried to distinguish true threats from background movement. The more it compensated, the worse the problem became. "They've got it backwards," Emma reported, unable to keep the satisfaction from her voice. "Their suits are programmed to filter out natural movement patterns and highlight artificial ones. But we're moving naturally, and the jungle's moving artificially because of their presence." The patrol was starting to break formation, each soldier's suit generating conflicting threat assessments. One alien fired at a falling leaf, their advanced targeting systems unable to cope with the simple ballistics of jungle debris. Another spun in circles, sensors overwhelmed by the cascade of false positives. That's when Torres sprung the trap. The jungle erupted in synchronized chaos. Every animal within half a kilometer, agitated by subsonic frequencies, Emma's team had been broadcasting for hours, moved at once. Birds took flight, monkeys scattered, insects swarmed. The aliens' neural interfaces, designed to identify and filter regular patterns, were confronted with pure natural disorder. In their moment of confusion, Taurus's team struck. They dropped from the canopy like jaguars, moving with such fluid grace that the alien sensors registered them as part of the jungle's normal motion. Before the hegemony troops could override their suits' safeties, Taurus's operators had stripped them of weapons and equipment. The entire engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. "Command, Mantis," Emma reported, already moving to the extraction point. "Theory confirmed. Their neural interfaces can't distinguish between natural chaos and coordinated human movement if we match the jungle's patterns perfectly." "Outstanding work," Miller responded. "Get those suits back to base. Time to show these aliens that their greatest strength is about to become their greatest weakness. Emma took one last look at the disarmed patrol through her scope. The aliens stood in shocked silence, their sophisticated combat suits now little more than expensive environmental protection. On each of their faceplates, Taurus's team had painted a simple message in organic pigments that their sensors registered as natural mineral deposits. The jungle sends its regards. 3 void hunters materialized at the edge of a flooded lowland, their quantum phase armor gleaming like oil on water. Elite soldiers bred for vacuum combat, they moved with an unnatural precision that made even veteran hegemony troops uneasy. Their mission was simple: terminate the human resistance that had humiliated regular forces for weeks. Atmospheric composition compromised. The lead hunter reported, his voice a synthetic growl. Organic particulates exceeding acceptable parameters. It wasn't just the air. The entire environment assaulted their enhanced senses. Mud sucked at their boots. Actual physical resistance, anathema to warriors trained in zero gravity. The canopy above blocked their quantum communications, forcing them to rely on primitive local broadcasts. Worse, the humidity played havoc with their phase shift capabilities. Movement, the second hunter announced. Bearing 035, range 50 meters. Their target appeared almost leisurely, a single human female, walking into the clearing. Lieutenant Emma Blackwood carried no visible weapons, her combat uniform caked with mud and vegetation. She stopped at the water's edge, hands loose at her sides. "Welcome to Earth," she called out. "I assume you're the elite unit we've heard so much about." The hunters raised their phase rifles in perfect unison. "Surrender or be terminated." Emma smiled. Interesting choice of words. She took a single step backward. "Tell me, did your combat simulators account for this?" The ground beneath the hunters' feet shifted, not the simple pit trap they were expecting. Their sensors had already ruled that out. Instead, the entire bank of the flood plain began to move. Countless tiny adjustments in the soil structure adding up to catastrophic terrain failure. The Void Hunters' reflexes were supernatural. All 3 activated their phase shift drives simultaneously, expecting to quantum tunnel through any physical trap. Instead, their drives sparked and failed, overwhelmed by the electromagnetic properties of the iron-rich mud. "Impossible," the lead hunter snarled, sinking knee-deep in the sucking earth. "Our system's air. Perfectly calibrated for vacuum combat." Emma finished. "But tell me, what's the electrical conductivity of mud compared to space?" The hunters fought against their training, against every combat drill burned into their enhanced nervous systems. In space, stillness was survival. On Earth, in this mud, stillness meant sinking deeper. Their struggles only accelerated the process. "Now, Shadow," Emma whispered into her mic. The jungle came alive. Master Sergeant Taurus and his team emerged from camouflage, so perfect that even the hunters' quantum scanning couldn't distinguish them from the vegetation. They seemed to materialize from the mud itself, their bodies covered in the same conductive clay that was playing havoc with the hunters' phase technology. "You rely too much on your toys," Taurus said, his voice carrying across the water. "We learned to fight before we learned to walk upright." The hunters tried to bring their weapons to bear, but the mud had other ideas. Every movement sank them deeper, while Taurus's team glided across the surface using primitive wooden boards strapped to their feet. The humans had turned the flooded ground into a weapon, using the aliens' own mass and movement against them. "Your combat algorithms are impressive," Emma called out, still standing easily on her patch of solid ground. "But they're designed for an environment where physics is predictable. Down here." She gestured at the surrounding jungle. "Nature writes her own rules." The lead hunter made a final attempt to activate his phase shift. The mud's electromagnetic field interfered with the quantum field, creating a cascade failure that shorted out his entire suit. His companions, trying to aid him, suffered the same fate. In less than 5 minutes, the hegemony's most elite warriors stood disarmed and mud-coated, their advanced technology rendered useless by simple terrestrial physics. Take their equipment, Emma ordered. And make sure our guests understand something. She walked forward, stepping carefully on the natural ridge lines only a lifetime in the jungle could help you spot. You're not fighting humans anymore. You're fighting an entire world. And Earth. She smiled as distant thunder rolled across the canopy. Earth fights back. The Void Hunters, stripped of their technological advantages, could only watch as their quantum armor was dragged beneath the mud by the inexorable pull of Earth's gravity, a force they had trained all their lives to escape, now becoming their undoing. Colonel Marcus, Old Man, Reynolds stood in the makeshift command center, his weathered hands tracing the path of hegemony supply lines on a holographic map. 50 years of military service had taught him that every army, human or alien, lived and died by its logistics. The aliens' supposedly superior supply chain had one critical weakness. They'd never fought an enemy who could predict the weather. Latest intercepts confirm it, Captain Miller reported, limping into the room. They're rerouting all major supply operations to their aerial transports. Ground convoys are taking too many losses. Reynolds allowed himself a grim smile. Then they're playing right into our hands. Status on Operation Thunderstroke. Torres and Blackwood are in position. We got 14 teams embedded along their primary flight corridors, all synchronized with the meteorological forecast. She paused, studying the old colonel's expression. You really think they'll fall for it? They already have. Reynolds switched the display to a weather pattern analysis. Look at their flight paths. Perfect geometric courses, calculated for maximum fuel efficiency. Not a single deviation for weather conditions. Because their ships can handle any storm, Miller noted. Any natural storm, Reynolds corrected. But nature's got a few tricks they haven't learned about yet. Patch me through to all teams. The radio crackled to life, connecting them to operators hidden throughout the Amazon basin. Reynolds took a moment to study the atmospheric data one last time before speaking. Execute Phase 1. Across hundreds of square kilometers, Special Forces teams activated devices that looked deceptively primitive, burning specific combinations of local vegetation, releasing carefully measured amounts of moisture into the rising air, all coordinated with the approaching weather front. The process, developed over decades of studying the Amazon's microclimate, could turn a normal storm into something far more dangerous. Sir, one of the technicians called out. Hegemony transport squadron approaching the convergence zone. Reynolds watched as a dozen alien ships, sleek and arrogant in their technological superiority, flew directly into the trap. The leading edge of the storm front hit them first, nothing their shields couldn't handle. But they didn't realize that humans had learned to weaponize the atmosphere itself. Phase 2, Reynolds ordered. The teams released their final catalysts. Moisture-laden air, superheated by the burning of specific rainforest plants, created a localized pressure differential that the aliens' weather models couldn't predict. Their ships, programmed to maintain perfect formation, flew straight into a manufactured microburst. Multiple contacts losing altitude, Miller reported, excitement creeping into her voice. Their shield harmonics are destabilizing. Reynolds keyed his command frequency. All teams, concentrate your efforts. Push them toward the prepared zones. The alien ships fought against forces their computers couldn't comprehend. Their sensors, designed to detect energy weapons and kinetic threats, were blind to the subtle interplay of temperature, pressure, and moisture that humans had studied for centuries. One by one, their engines failed as they were battered by winds moving in impossible patterns. Ground teams reporting, Miller announced. First transport down. Second and third veering into Sector 7, where Blackwood's team left them a landing zone. Reynolds finished. The only clear area for kilometers. The alien pilots, desperate for solid ground, took the bait. Their ships settled onto what looked like firm terrain, until the first drops of rain hit the soil. The ground, chemically treated by Special Forces teams days in advance, turned to liquid beneath their landing struts. Sir, Miller's voice was filled with fierce pride. All primary targets grounded. Torres's team is moving to secure the cargo. Reynolds nodded, watching as the carefully orchestrated storm began to dissipate. Send word to command. Tell them the weather forecast calls for clear skies and one hell of a salvage operation. As reports flowed in from the field teams, Reynolds reflected on the irony. The hegemony had come to Earth expecting to find primitive warriors wielding crude weapons. Instead, they found humans who had turned their entire world into an arsenal. Every raindrop, every gust of wind, every shift in temperature was a potential weapon in the hands of those who understood Earth's true power. Your move, alien friends, he muttered, watching the storm clouds disperse. Your move. The storm that swept over the hegemony's main power core wasn't natural. Lieutenant Emma Blackwood knew because she had helped birth it, working with Reynolds' weather manipulation teams for 3 days to set up the perfect conditions. Now, as lightning split the sky with impossible precision, she gave the signal. All units, execute Operation Thunderclap. I say again, Thunderclap is go. The response came as whispers through her earpiece, each team acknowledging with their call signs. Somewhere in the darkness, Torres and his operators were already moving. The aliens wouldn't see them coming, not with the electromagnetic interference from the storm playing havoc with their sensors. Through her night vision goggles, Emma watched the hegemony's defense grid flicker. Their shield generators were struggling to maintain coherence against the artificially enhanced lightning strikes. Each bolt carried a specific electromagnetic signature, the result of minerals seeded into the clouds over the past 72 hours. Mantis, this is Shadow. We're in position at Breach Point Alpha. You're not going to believe what we found. Emma keyed her mic. Send it. They built their foundations directly on the ground. Torres reported, barely concealing his satisfaction. No insulation against the soil. Their whole power distribution network is vulnerable to ground current. A smile spread across Emma's mud-streaked face. They really don't understand Earth at all, do they? That's not even the best part, Torres continued. The walls of their facility. They're alive. Emma froze. Explain. They used some kind of advanced metal that adapts to environmental conditions, but they didn't account for Earth's biology. Local fungi have been growing into the molecular structure. The whole outer shell is compromised. Another lightning bolt illuminated the facility, and Emma saw it clearly now. The once pristine alien metal had a distinctive organic texture. Earth wasn't just fighting back, it was literally consuming their technology. All teams, adjust timeline, she ordered. We move now. Use Protocol 7. Protocol 7 was something they'd discovered by accident 2 weeks ago. The alien metals, when exposed to specific combinations of organic compounds, became temporarily permeable. It was as if Earth itself had found a way to reject the foreign materials. Emma's team moved through the rain like ghosts, their bodies covered in a paste made from local fungi and minerals. As they approached the facility walls, the alien metal reacted just as they'd predicted, microscopically shifting its structure, trying to adapt, but instead creating gaps large enough for humans to slip through. Command, this is Mantis. We are inside the perimeter, moving to Phase 2. The facility's internal sensors should have detected them immediately. But Torres's team had spent the last week introducing specific bacteria into the local ecosystem, organisms that produced trace amounts of gases that exactly matched human breath signatures. The aliens' biofilters, overwhelmed by what they interpreted as background contamination, had been steadily decreasing their sensitivity. Emma reached the main power core just as another lightning bolt struck. Through the transparent sections of the facility's roof, she could see the aliens in panic mode, their movements becoming more erratic as system after system reported impossible anomalies. They're beautiful, in their way, she subvocalized, watching the hegemony troops rush to combat threats their technology insisted couldn't exist. All that power, and they never learned to listen to the world around them. Charges set, Torres reported. Ready on your mark. Emma took one last look at the alien facility, noting how the walls seemed to pulse with fungal life. You know what the real irony is? We didn't beat them with superior technology. We beat them by understanding inferior life forms, the bacteria, fungi, and microorganisms they dismissed as primitive. She keyed her detonator. Execute. The explosion wasn't conventional. Instead, it released a carefully engineered mixture of organic compounds that triggered a cascade reaction in the facility's power systems. The alien metal, already compromised by Earth's microscopic invaders, began to break down at the molecular level. As the hegemony's most secure facility literally dissolved into the jungle floor, Emma couldn't help but think that Earth had just taught the aliens a lesson they'd never forget. True power doesn't come from controlling nature, but from becoming part of it. Supreme Warmaster Kavark reviewed the latest battle reports with growing horror. The holographic displays in his command center showed a systematic collapse of hegemony operations across the Amazon basin. But it wasn't the losses that terrified him. It was the manner of their defeat. Impossible, he muttered, mandibles clicking in agitation. They're savages. Primitives. They don't even have basic stellar travel. Sir, his second-in-command approached cautiously. We've decoded more of their communications. You need to see this. The display shifted to show surveillance footage from their last functioning forward base. A hegemony patrol moved through the undergrowth, sensors at maximum sensitivity. Everything appeared normal until the footage shifted to thermal imaging. Watch the background heat signatures, the second-in-command advised. Kavark's compound eyes widened. In the thermal view, human operators were everywhere. Their body temperatures perfectly matched to their surroundings, their movements synchronized with the natural flow of heat in the jungle. They weren't invisible. They were thermal chameleons. How long? Kavark demanded. How long have they been there? The timestamp indicates 3 days before the attack. They were literally living in the walls of our base, sir. Their body chemistry adapted to match the local biological signatures. Our sensors registered them as part of the structure. New alerts flashed across the displays. Another supply convoy had gone dark, their quantum-shielded vessels somehow grounded by nothing more than rain and wind. The humans had learned to predict and manipulate weather patterns that hegemony computers still couldn't model. Show me the prisoner interrogation files, Kavark ordered. The footage played. A captured human special forces operator, covered in mud and plant matter, facing a hegemony intelligence officer. But instead of breaking under questioning, the human was smiling. You still don't get it, do you? The prisoner's voice was calm, almost pitying. You think you're fighting soldiers. You're not. You're fighting thousands of years of human adaptation. Every trick we're using, we learned from Earth itself. Kavark slammed his appendage against the console. We are the hegemony. We have conquered systems your primitive minds cannot even comprehend. Sir, his second-in-command interrupted. Additional reports from Sector 7. The humans, they're not just adapting anymore. They're teaching others. The display showed training camps hidden beneath the canopy. Special forces operators working with indigenous tribes, combining centuries-old jungle knowledge with modern tactical expertise. They had created a hybrid warfare doctrine that defied conventional military logic. Thermal camouflage learned from snakes. The second-in-command read from the analysis. Movement patterns copied from jungle cats. Communication methods based on local bird species. They're not just using the environment. They're becoming part of it. A new alert screamed for attention. Base Theta, their most heavily defended installation, had gone dark. The footage showed its quantum-reinforced walls being literally digested by engineered fungi. The humans had weaponized Earth's smallest organisms against hegemony technology. Sir, a communications officer called out, we're picking up a transmission. It's being broadcast on all frequencies. The voice that filled the command center belonged to Colonel Marcus Reynolds. To the hegemony command, you called our world primitive, our forests worthless. But while you were learning to break the laws of physics, we were learning to work with them. Every root, every leaf, every microbe on this planet is part of Earth's immune system. And like any good immune system, it knows how to reject foreign invaders. Kvark watched as his tactical display became a sea of red alerts. Across the Amazon, hegemony forces were facing an enemy they couldn't fight, because that enemy was the planet itself. "We never needed your advanced technology," Reynolds continued. "We just needed you to keep underestimating us long enough to show you what primitive really means." The Supreme War Master looked out through his command center's viewport at the jungle beyond. For the first time, he saw it not as an obstacle to be overcome, but as a living weapon that had been pointed at his forces from the moment they landed. "Signal the fleet," he ordered quietly. "Begin evacuation protocols." In the endless green beyond his walls, something moved, something his sensors still couldn't detect. And for the first time in his military career, Supreme War Master Kvark felt true fear. The peace negotiations weren't held in a sterile conference room or aboard a spacecraft. Instead, Captain Jessica Miller stood in a natural clearing of the Amazon rainforest, watching Supreme War Master Kvark's mandibles twitch nervously as a harpy eagle screamed overhead. His honor guard of void hunters stood rigidly, their advanced armor now pitted and scarred by the simple chemistry of Earth's atmosphere. "You understand why we chose this location?" Miller asked, her voice carrying across the humid air. Behind her, Master Sergeant Torres and Lieutenant Blackwood materialized from the undergrowth, their camouflage so perfect that even the hegemony's quantum sensors hadn't detected their presence. "To remind us of our failure," Kvark responded, but Miller shook her head. "To teach you why you failed." She gestured at the surrounding jungle. "Look around. Really look. What do you see?" The alien commander's compound eyes scanned the environment. Primitive vegetation, inefficient biological systems, chaotic life. Torres interrupted, stepping forward. His clothing was caked with mud that perfectly matched the forest floor. 4 billion years of evolution. Every plant, every insect, every microbe. They're all part of Earth's immune system, and they all taught us how to fight. As if to emphasize his point, a section of ground near the hegemony delegation shifted, revealing a camouflaged special forces team that had been lying there for hours. The Void Hunters raised their weapons instinctively, but their targeting systems couldn't lock onto the humans' heat signatures. "Impossible," one hunter muttered. "Our sensors were designed to detect technological threats," Blackwood finished. She wiped a streak of mud from her face, revealing a predatory smile. "But we didn't beat you with technology, did we? We beat you by becoming part of Earth's natural defense system." Colonel Reynolds emerged from behind a massive tree, carrying a simple wooden box. Inside was a sample of local soil teeming with the engineered bacteria that had eaten through the hegemony's quantum-hardened metals. "Your scientists still can't explain how we did it, can they?" Kvark's mandibles clicked in frustrated admission. "Our analysis teams have found no technological explanation for your achievements. The thermal masking, the weather manipulation, the molecular degradation of our materials." "Because you're looking for technology," Miller said. "We didn't invent these techniques. We learned them. From snakes that match ambient heat signatures, from fungi that break down the strongest materials, from weather patterns that have been cycling for millions of years." She limped forward, her old combat injury a testament to human fragility and resilience. "The terms of surrender are simple. Earth remains sovereign and untouchable. Any future contact must be by our invitation only. And if we refuse," Kvark challenged, though there was no real defiance in his voice. The jungle answered for her. Every bird, insect, and animal fell silent at once, a demonstration of the complete environmental control that had broken the hegemony's greatest armies. In the unnatural quiet, the aliens could hear their own breathing, ragged and nervous in their sealed suits. "Then we'll teach other worlds what we know," Torres said softly. "Every jungle planet, every swamp world, every primitive ecosystem you've dismissed, they could all learn what Earth taught us. about turning life itself into a defense network that no technology can overcome. Kvark looked up at the canopy, seeing it with new eyes. Not as an obstacle to be cleared, but as a weapon system more sophisticated than anything in the hegemony's arsenal. An organic supercomputer that had been refining its defense algorithms since life first crawled from Earth's primordial seas. "We accept your terms," he said finally. "And we request teachers." Miller smiled. "That's the first wise decision you've made since arriving on Earth." She extended her hand, a human gesture of peace that seemed somehow more significant than any formal treaty. "Welcome to a new kind of warfare, Supreme Warmaster. One where victory doesn't go to the strongest technology, but to those who understand that true strength lies in dancing with the natural order, not trying to dominate it." And somewhere in the jungle's depths, a low rumble of thunder seemed to seal the agreement. Earth itself had spoken, and the galaxy would never be the same.